Okay, guys, as we move into chapter 6 is all about radicals or square roots or cube roots or fourth roots and reducing them and knowing how to work with them. 6.1's going to start off very, very basic. All the numbers will be perfect numbers. What I want you to know is that on the back of your notes, you're going to see this sheet. I want you to take the time to fill out your squares, your cubes, your fourths, and your fifths. Just type them in your calculator. You definitely do want to fill this out, and I will let you use it on tests and quizzes as long as nothing else is written on it. So fill this sheet out on the back of your notes. All right, let's start at the beginning. You will use a radical sign, which means like a check mark, to indicate a root. The number under the radical sign is the radicand. So this A, whatever that number is the radicand. The index gives the degree of the root. So whatever number you see in here is the index. Maybe you want to make mention if you don't see an index, it's 2. So if you don't see one, if you don't see a number here, it is 2. It's an implied 2. It's the square root. And then this check marks thing, that is the radical sign. Okay? Like the actual check mark, that's the radical sign. Oops. So if I say, what's under the radical sign, you would say the radicand. If I say, what's the index, you tell me whatever number you see. So there are 4 parts. I redid the notes just so I can try to break 6.1 into the 4 parts that exist. Part 1, the directions will say find all roots. Part 2, the directions will say find each root. Part 3, the directions will say simplify each. In part 4, you have to know how to solve for x to a certain power. So I tried to break the notes down to make sense, and the classwork should really, hopefully, flow pretty well from this. Okay, let's start with the directions. If it says to find all roots, the square root will not be drawn for you. So, there's a big difference between even roots and odd roots. If the directions say all roots, you will have positive answers and negative answers. Okay? So with even roots, you will have positives and negatives. Odd roots, you will only have positive or negative. You don't use plus and minus for odd roots. Let's see if that's enough to get us started. So part A, the first question says, what are the real cube roots of these numbers? So I want to focus on this word cube. That means a cube root is that. It has a little 3 inside of it. Well, that's odd, right? So our answer is either going to be positive or negative. Well, I do have something to add to this. Even roots, you cannot find an even root of a negative number. You cannot find an even root of a negative number. Odd numbers, that's okay to have negative numbers. Okay? And I'll try to, as I go through, I'll explain why. So we need the cube root of 0.008. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my sheet, and I'm going to go to my cube list, and I'm going to find the cube root, there it is, of this 8. So the cube root of 0.008 is going to be 0.2. I'll show this to you in a moment. So this was a positive 0.8. So the cube root is going to be a 0.2. Okay, I can explain decimals more tomorrow. The long and the short of it is if you have 3 decimals and a cube root, it ends up only being 1 decimal. Now I'd like to prove it. 0.2 to the 3rd power is 0.008. And the answer is positive because the original was positive. Now let's do the cube root of negative 1,000. I'm going to get my paper. I'm going to go to 1,000 in my cube list, and the answer is 10. The cube root of 1,000 is 10. Now, not just 10, because this original one was negative, it's negative 10. And to prove that this is true, you do negative 10 to the 3rd power, and you get negative 1,000. Last one. So it says 1 over 27. I'm going to go to my paper again. I'm going to go to the cube root. The cube root of 1 is 1. The cube root of 27 is 3. So this will be a 1/3. The original was positive, so the answer is positive. To prove it, I will do 1/3 to the third power, and you will see it is 1/27, so I did it right. Part B, what are the fourth roots? Now a fourth root is even. So I need a plus and a minus on these ones because I said so up here. When you need to find all roots, it's a positive and a negative. So they're going to start pretty basics and just do 1. What is the fourth root of 1? Well, let me go to my fourth list. Here's a 1. The fourth root of it is 1. But because this is an even root, positive and negative 1. Now maybe you're wondering why the positive and the negative 1. Here's what I'm going to show you. Let's see if I turn this light on if it helps. It helps a little. If I do 1 to the fourth power, if I do 1 to the fourth power, I get positive 1. And if I do negative 1 to the fourth power, I also get positive 1. So positive and negative 1 are my answers because if I take them to the fourth power, I end up with a positive at the end. Now, they're pretty much asking, what is the fourth root of negative 0.000001? Since this is even and this is negative, there is no real solution here. You cannot take the fourth root of a negative number. You cannot take, and maybe we want to write this down. You cannot take an even root of a negative number. There's nothing times itself an even amount of times that can ever be negative. All right, let's do the last one, 16/81. So I'm going to look at my fourth list, and I've got, here's my fourth, 16 is going to give me a 2, 81 will give me a 3. So 16/81 becomes 2/3. Because it's even and it was positive, both a positive and a negative 2/3 are my answers. And if you'd like me to prove it on the calculator, it would be positive 2/3 to the fourth power. Oops. Sorry. There we go. Gives me 16/81, and let me cheat, negative 2/3 will give me positive 16/81. Okay, now we're going to practice one more time. Fifth root, that's odd. Negatives are okay. What times itself 5 times gives you 0? 0, that's an easy one. Okay, let's look at our fifth root for 1. The fifth root of 1 is 1. It's okay that it's negative because it was odd. If it begun negative, it needs to end negative. So negative 1 to the fifth would give you negative 1. Now let's do 32. Look at your list. 32 breaks down to 2 on my fifth list. And since it was positive at the beginning, it's positive at the end. Part B, square roots. Square roots, there's an implied 2, so we have an even. Negatives are not okay. And I need to make sure I use plus and minus in my answers. So if I have 0.01, there's 2 decimals. I can explain decimals more tomorrow, but the square root of 0.01 is just 0.1 with a plus and a minus. This is a negative. You cannot have a square root of negative, so we write no real solutions. Even roots cannot be negative. Now if I go to my square list, the square root of 36 is 6. The square root of 121 is 11. And because we want to find all the possible roots, we must use a plus and a minus sign. So both positive and negative 6 over 11 squared will give you 36 over 121.